It is a truth universally acknowledged that platforming segments in first-person games kind of suck. Judging your position and movement in first person is harder than more drawn-back views, and first-person games that feature platforming segments are usually built to focus on other areas of gameplay, leaving these sections to be frustrating and difficult. It was surprising then that in late 2000s developer DICE, best known for large-scale multiplayer-focused Battlefield series, would release the single-player oops-all-platforming first-person parkour game Mirror's Edge. At launch, the game reviewed well, but these didn't convert into the sales numbers that publisher EA were hoping for, though it would develop a devoted fanbase amongst many who did play it. It received a reboot 8 years later with Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which wouldn't be as well received for a variety of reasons, but it is nonetheless a solid game well worth the time of those who enjoyed the first. We're going to be having a look at both of them today. The difficulty with doing something new is that you often don't have a clear idea of how the project will work best until it is finished. This is something that is apparent throughout Mirror's Edge. A first-person game focused on movement and physicality sounds like a simple enough idea, but actually building it, what will work, what won't, doesn't become apparent until you've finished making much of it, by which time it's too late to undo much of the work. This leads to Mirror's Edge being something of an unbalanced experience at times. Parts of the game feel clunky and can be frustrating, but the bits that work well enough to excuse much of that. One of the weakest elements of the game comes in the form of its combat. It can be frustratingly challenging. A single enemy can be dangerous, and facing two at once often is a recipe for disaster, so the name of the game becomes dodging and weaving until you can isolate one enemy and take them out. You can use enemy weapons. Guns used to play a bigger part in early designs, as the player was given a permanent sidearm, but weapons you pick up are inaccurate and slow your movement, as well as having no way to reload, so they're only a temporary boost. This combat, and the gunplay especially, are often cited as being the worst part of the game, and it is true, but I don't actually think it's fair to say they're bad at a fundamental level. There's an old Half-Life mod I was always very fond of called The Specialists. It was heavily inspired by films such as The Matrix and Hard Boiled. Combat was mostly gun-based with some martial arts to fall back on, but my favourite way to play was a mode that only gave you one magazine in each weapon. Gameplay became a mad dash to grab fallen weapons once yours was out, and at its best, Mirror's Edge fights can capture much of that experience, scrambling and dodging before finally getting your hands on a gun, taking out a few enemies, then dashing off again to relocate. With more focus and more work, this could have actually been a really fun combat system. The major problem with it is that actually it's tonally conflicting with the character work. It never feels in character to be gunning down police, so the combat encounters always feel out of place. Thankfully, DICE didn't put the work in, so instead the fighting takes a backseat to the running, and the running in Mirror's Edge is excellent. I often think that flow states in gaming are sometimes overvalued, but at its best, the flow states that Mirror's Edge can provide are truly sublime. Linking jumps, rolls, vaults and wall runs together to smoothly navigate the rooftops of the city is an experience unattempted before and unsurpassed since. Many more first-person games have implemented such movement mechanics since Mirror's Edge's release, but often they are secondary elements of gameplay, and are therefore easy to execute. Here, there's just the right balance of how easy moves are to execute and how hard they are to string together smoothly. Navigation can be picked up quickly, but making it flow nicely takes practice, and the short length of the game does encourage multiple playthroughs to improve on this. There's a feature called Runner's Vision that highlights in bright red elements of the environment that can be used for navigation, but you're likely to turn this off after the first playthrough, since then you'll have developed your own sense for it. The mechanics you use most, the routes you most enjoy taking, develops a unique way of navigating the environment, and so movement becomes a tool of self-expression. The more open rooftops with multiple paths are where the game is at its best, but unfortunately at times indoor sections will slow the pace to a crawl. There are several indoor areas throughout the game, with them increasing in density in the back half, the worst of these being a boat level towards the end. The cramped hallways and small rooms without enough space to really pick up speed aren't the problem, so much as the areas where there is only one way to progress. In these instances, the movement stops being a tool of creativity and simply becomes a puzzle to be solved. Working out the correct sequence of ledges to climb to reach the next area can be slow and frustrating, and often involves as much trial and error as some of the more difficult combat encounters. They don't make up a huge amount of the runtime, fortunately, and it often won't be long before you're back on a rooftop free to pick up movement again, often with someone chasing you. Chase sequences feature all of the freedom and creativity of regular movement, but now with a frenetic pace. They aren't super difficult, but they're a test of your ability to navigate efficiently and make quick decisions under pressure. Gunfire bursts around you, ripping holes in vents and smashing windows as you sprint past. The speed is exhilarating and the escape rewarding, assuming you're up to the challenge. If you can make these decisions and spot your path forward quickly, they're great, but failure to do so can result in you trying sections over and over again to work out where you're supposed to be going, which can be frustrating. This is another area where repeat playthroughs benefit the game, but early on, while you're still getting used to the movement, you're likely to have to rely on the game's runner vision rather than your own. There's an underlying sense that what you're seeing may not actually be how the world appears, not in some kind of nefarious hallucinogenic or mind control sort of way, of course, but the highlighting of objects in red combined with all of the foliage in the game appearing as pure white seems to suggest this may not be truly how the world looks, but rather how your character is seeing it. Fortunately, what they're seeing is absolutely gorgeous. There's no two ways about it. While character models may be a little rough looking at times, from an environmental perspective, Mirror's Edge may be one of the best looking games ever made. Part of this is the technology behind it. Mirror's Edge was built using Unreal Engine 3 since DICE's own Frostbite engine was still in early development at the time, but instead of Unreal's built-in system, a lighting solution developed by Illuminate Labs was used. These days, graphics cards can be powerful enough to use real-time ray tracing to produce accurate reflections and bounce lighting, but this was impossible on the hardware of the time. Instead, lighting would often be calculated in advance, known as baking, and then saved as part of the level. Illuminate Labs implemented a similar system that produced fantastic light map bakes, with lighting accurately reflecting off of surfaces and spreading colour around the scene. Since this was pre-calculated, it could run on hardware at the time with relative ease, though, during development, calculations to bake the lighting could take DICE's 400 CPU strong render farm upwards of 24 hours to bake the light maps of a single area. The only disadvantages being that it was static, it couldn't be changed during gameplay, and any moving objects, such as characters, needed rougher approximations applied to them. But the results were spectacular, especially when combined with the art direction of the project. The city in Mirror's Edge is clean and pristine. Almost every area of the game is a clear white with highlights of vibrant colours. With bounce lighting in effect, coloured surfaces spread their colour to the white walls around them. Lighting is soft and vibrant, and colour grading is applied after the fact to increase contrast and boost highlights. White areas end up super exposed, and shadows feel cool and natural, but your eyesight gradually adjusts while moving from one to the other, so your view is always clear and readable. In a nice touch, the game actually slightly desaturates the world while you're standing still, bringing the saturation back up as you pick up speed, so the world comes alive even more so as you do. The use of colour and lighting in this game is so good that frankly, it gives even modern games a run for their money. I wasn't exaggerating when I say it may be one of the best looking games ever made, even over a decade later, but at the time it was staggering. Other big games from 2008 include Grand Theft Auto 4, Fallout 3, Metal Gear Solid 4 and Far Cry 2. All good games, all graphically impressive, but the parade of desaturated monochromatic grit can't hold a candle to Mirror's Edge's vibrant world. The city itself is deliberately vague in its characterization. Some background text implies it's likely somewhere in the USA, but its name is never specified and neither is its location or even the country it's in. Architecture is a mix of skyscrapers with a variety of European and American influences, but there's also some East Asian influences such as the storm drains, based on Tokyo's flood prevention system. Text and signs are mostly in English, though some are accompanied by East Asian languages as well, though it can't be pinned down to a single language or writing system. This gives the city a sense of universality, further enhanced by its diverse cast of background characters. It's no specific country, it's just the city. This is enhanced by the size of it. Despite the size of many modern cities, with a few exceptions, most have limited central areas of skyscrapers and high-rises, but the city here stretches as far as can be seen in every direction, with high-rises and skyscrapers the whole way, so despite the beauty of the environments, there is a sense of being trapped within its all-encompassing frame. The underlying sense of oppression is narratively relevant as well. Before the game takes place, the city went through a gradual but radical series of reforms in the name of security, and mass protests against the changes, known as the November riots, ultimately failed, with the populace mostly learning to accept them with time. A few people are still fighting to improve things, but with privacy restricted and most forms of communication monitored, the only way to get messages and items to one another is through a series of couriers and runners, traversing the city's rooftops on foot and avoiding the city protection force. You play as one of these runners, Faith Connors, an established runner but returning to work after an injury received before the events of the game, events which are covered in a prequel comic. This comic and the game as a whole were written by Rhianna Pratchett, who has a history of strong writing across various games, and it's true here too. The length of the game combined with the complexity of the plot makes this a difficult task. A complex web of conspiracies and a large cast of characters, none of which get a great deal of screen time to be developed, makes effective writing difficult, but there's an efficiency to the writing in Mirror's Edge that carries the narrative well. Characters may only appear briefly, but they're quickly established. Each has their own agenda and their loyalties may shift throughout the narrative, but you get a good sense of who they are and their relationships to one another despite the limited time to do so. It's a shame too, these characters are well realised and likeable, but you never get more than a surface level sense of them due to the rapidity that they enter and leave the plot. The world building in general is like that too. There's a great moment towards the end of the game. Scattered throughout the levels are hidden bags, and gathering them unlocks concept art in the main menu. Many of these are hidden in areas where runners have included crude drawings and notes to one another on the walls, but next to one of the bags hidden in a vent in the final level is graffiti reading, "Where is November?" Reaching this area, Faith has a little internal monologue about the changes that happen to the city. It's not much, but it's background for the world and character building at the same time. Unfortunately, it's the only instance of this happening in the game, and I wish that the team could have taken the time to add more of these moments throughout. Overall, it reminds me of John Wick in a strange way. The original John Wick had lots of little nods and hints to a greater setting, organisations and characters you only see an outline of. All of this negative space is engaging, and it's much the same here in Mirror's Edge. Though, given that, perhaps it's best we never got a direct sequel to Mirror's Edge, given how convoluted and messy the John Wick sequels immediately became when trying desperately to fill in all that negative space with its lore. The game, however, does just the right amount of negative space. You get a good idea of who Faith is through her actions and interactions, but her backstory is limited. Her parents were involved in the November riots, but her mother died during one of them. In the aftermath, she ran away from home and fell in with the runners after one of them, Mercury, caught her breaking into his hideout. It's a simple backstory, but it facilitates her motivations throughout much of the game. Supportive of the movement, hostile to the authorities, but staying on the edge of society. She cares about the people who she's connected to, Merc, fellow runners, Celeste, and most importantly her sister Kate. Kate and her have been somewhat estranged since she ran away, and a lot of this is to do with the fact that Kate joined the city protection force. In the first level, it's noted that the police have suddenly become jumpy and increasingly hostile towards the runners, but the plot really kicks in when Faith overhears Kate in trouble while listening in on police radio. Upon arriving, she finds that reformist mayoral candidate, ringleader of the November riots, and old family friend Robert Pope has been shot dead, with Kate's gun, while Kate was blacked out, and she has no idea what has happened. What follows is a whistle-stop tour of the city, chasing down leads to uncover the conspiracy. The specifics of the conspiracy are a little unclear at times, but the broad strokes are that the powers that be, including current Mayor Callahan, owner of the major construction conglomerate working around the city, were getting antsy about Pope's chances. He wanted him dead and wanted it to be pinned on a cop to allow corporate security firm Pirandello Kruger to have an excuse to take over city security, further cementing power in the hands of corporate authoritarians. They also wanted Pope gone because he learned about Project Icarus, a plan to finally end opposition to the city leadership by disrupting the Runners' network. This includes specially trained pursuit units. They're first introduced when you uncover their training facility, and the chase to work your way out of it and back up to street level is one of the best in the game. They're not as big a challenge as they first seem, but the sudden shake-up of facing enemies as mobile as you really adds some tension to the few encounters you have with them. Something I really like about the plot overall is the exact reason Kate is chosen to be framed in the first place, because there isn't one. She was a completely arbitrary choice, just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. One villain even notes that they didn't even know she had a sister, let alone that she was a runner. The refusal to make Kate and Faith anyone important is a powerful one. Many other games would have wanted some specific reason for them to be involved, but not having one is a much better decision. Despite the glimmer and sheen of the city, the underlying setting is one of oppressive corporate authoritarianism. By making Kate and Faith relative nobodies, it hints at a greater truth. Despite its insistence on security and safety, anyone can become the target of authoritarian violence. Though they may target specific outgroups at first, any perceived infraction, any disagreement with leadership, even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, can subject you to its ire, just like Kate. But, just like Faith, anyone can stand against authoritarianism, even if it's only in some small way, even if it doesn't seem to do all that much in the moment. In Mirror's Edge it doesn't do that much. You do ultimately save Kate, but her and Faith are left on the run, and a mid-credits stinger reveals that you didn't even stop the conspiracy at large. The events are still being used to further increase control of the populace, but making a stand is still important, especially when you're standing with others, and that's a powerful message in the end. It is a pity that the prequel comics slightly undermine this. During them it's revealed that Faith and Kate's father wasn't just in the November riots, but like Robert Pope, he was one of the major ringleaders. Furthermore, while this put the family into debt, her mother, a talented electrical engineer, developed some of the underlying technology for the surveillance system controlling the populace to try and pay off their debts. This filling in of backstory to make Faith the daughter of more important people is a shame, though to its credit, the game wouldn't use this as the reason for her or Kate getting involved in the conspiracy, but the plot point of Connor's being important family to the setting would be used in the sequel. Of course, the difficulty with doing something that's been done before is that it's easy to compare it to the previous work and find it wanting. This is, unfortunately, the case with Mirror's Edge Catalyst. In many ways, Catalyst is the inferior game. Take the visuals, for example. The reboot opted for a more explicitly sci-fi aesthetic to it. While the original's world was contemporary but exaggerated, Catalyst is clearly futuristic. Buildings and streets are larger and more technically complex than anything we currently make. Drones and airships fill the sky, and the police are equipped with sleek combat armour and VTOLs, rather than the more standard uniforms, SWAT gear and Black Hawks of the first game. The graphical tech too is something of a downgrade. While texture resolutions, model poly counts and detail density are all higher, the dynamic lights of the Frostbite engine still isn't quite as good as the carefully designed pre-baked global illumination of the first game. The world is also busier. Vibrant colour accents on a white base is still the primary colour choice, but the more complex environments cut up the clean blocks of colour the original used. If you compare it to the original, Catalyst comes up wanting, but comparison is, as I'm sure you're aware, the thief of joy. Looking at Catalyst on its own merits, it is a gorgeous game. The highly detailed world gives a sense of an expansive city beyond the available play area, while the sleek design work of the buildings well communicates the combination of corporate excess and authoritarian oppression. Furthermore, the visual language changes throughout the city. Lower class areas are more familiar, but as you move into higher class areas, the materials and architecture changes. Concrete is traded for glass, and abstract art starts to decorate the spaces. These geometric sculptures are reminiscent of the original game's only DLC, a series of time trial maps made up of purely abstract shapes floating in the void. Finally, as you move into the highest class districts, these abstract shapes incorporate themselves into the building works themselves. All of these areas, from the construction sites of the redistricting zone to the high-class apartments of Ocean Glass View, look fantastic in a variety of lighting conditions thanks to a day-night cycle, changing the feel and emotion of a space throughout the day. To compare Catalyst to its predecessor is to neglect much of what makes Catalyst special in its own right, so as best as I can, I'm going to avoid the comparisons, though I will still note similarities and differences where appropriate. I recognise these kinds of comparisons are common between creative works. I've always felt the gaming community can be slightly unfair to dev teams when it comes to comparing different works, even within the same franchise. People often forget that games, as with all creative works, are primarily made by people. Different people will always have different ideas, different approaches, different interests, and as such, will produce wildly different results given the same starting point. Even when the game comes from the same development studio, it doesn't mean much when the team has changed. It was 8 years between the original and Catalyst, and as far as I can tell, there aren't a huge number of people who worked on both. Certainly, the lead developers and directors are all different, so it's no surprise that the two works came out so different in approach and design. Catalyst was also a much larger project, with around double the people working on it and a much larger budget, so it's also no surprise changes were made to the overarching design to try and make it more appealing to its audience. The first of these big changes is its world. Catalyst has a lot more background lore in that it has some. The broad strokes are that after a dark age following a global, potentially nuclear war, the remaining land was eventually unified under Omnistat. Sometimes by force, but just as often through choice. The implied communistic society of Omnistat wasn't to everyone's tastes though, so a group of powerful families, led by the Kruger family, rebelled and started a civil war. Eventually, this led to the rise of three nations: the remains of Omnistat, a religious theocracy which brokered the peace, and Cascadia. Since then though, Cascadia and the Third Nation have been united in a cold war against Omnistat. Cascadia was intended to be a nation founded on democratic and individualistic principles, but only those with a high enough status could vote, and as soon as it began, the families that started the civil war transformed into corporations and monopolised all major industries, and the vast majority of Cascadia's natural resources. Eventually the government was dissolved and the leading corporations took over as the conglomerate. The November riots happened here too, but this time they were protests against the treatment of the lower classes. During the riots, a child Faith watched both her parents murdered by then head of Kruger Corporation Gabriel Kruger. She loses her sister trying to escape and accidentally kills a security officer, partially implied to be Kruger's son, before being taken in by family friend Noah and raised as a runner. The game starts as she is being let out of detention following the events of Catalyst's own prequel comic, Exordium. A lot of this world building is irrelevant to the plot and mostly conveyed through collectible documents. Omnistat is only mentioned in passing, the Third Nation is never mentioned outside of these documents, and you never see the evocatively named Grey Lands that lie between the major cities. In fact, I was unaware of much of this background during my first two playthroughs, but as I got more into it this time, I found myself quite taken by the world. It's clear a lot of thought has gone into the history of this world and the city now named Glass. It's readily apparent that the team wanted the world to be a setting, not just a skybox, and I'd have been interested to have dug more in depth into the wider setting had we been given the chance. The game limits you to Glass, not the capital of Cascadia, but a large and important city nonetheless, Sydney to Australia's Canberra, so to speak. Moving around Glass is as wonderful as it ever was. Extra moves have been added to make things even smoother, especially the dash to quickly get some speed after a hard stop, which keeps momentum going, and eliminates the slightly awkward sidestep that was the easiest way to get speed in the first game. Unfortunately, things do start a little slower. Catalyst has a skill tree that includes some movement and combat mechanics, including some of the fundamental ones. Starting out without some basic moves such as the roll and quick turn does make the opening sections of the game feel a little clunky, but progression through the tree is pretty fast, and unless you're focusing elsewhere for some reason, you get to Faith up to her full moveset pretty quickly. Some skills are progress gated as well, though none of the basic mechanics are. Most of them are for equipment like the grappling hook, which is used to unlock access to new areas of the world. Progression is quick enough that you'll have most skills you want well before the end of the game, and many of the combat skills are simply damage buffs, so they aren't hugely important on their own. The combat is a mixed bag. There's no weapons this time around, but you have both light and heavy attacks along with a dodge. You gain a basic shield while moving, and light attacks will let you move past enemies to maintain that shield, while also being effective against stunned opponents. Meanwhile, heavy attacks do huge damage when used in conjunction with traversal moves, or can be used to reposition enemies or knock them into the environment or one another. Moving from one enemy to another, controlling their positions, escaping to make your way back for high damage attacks, it actually feels really good when it's working as intended. Unfortunately, for it to work as intended, you need to tune into the specific rhythm of combat, which can be both finicky and prone to shifting suddenly, so while there are moments that feel like the movement is merging seamlessly with the combat to create a great sense of flow, more often than not, it ends up developing it into a hectic spammy mess. The open world nature of the game does limit the amount of combat, however. Most of the major encounters are kept inside main missions, though getting caught by a camera or encountering a random Krugersek patroller in the open world can initiate chase sequences, but they tend to be quite low intensity, which results in them being more of an annoyance than an exciting event. The open world is somewhat underutilised, but a good inclusion nonetheless. The game's focus on the movement systems means that traversing the open world from mission to mission is an engaging part of the game, rather than the commute that it can become in other games. Collectibles scatter the world, which can add background lore through the documents and recordings, but their primary use is to encourage creative navigation. The widely scattered data modules encourage you to divert to routes you may not have used previously, while the better hidden collectibles encourage deeper interactions with the environment and searching for the harder to reach areas. There was originally an online mode where you could hide markers in the world and challenge other players to find them, though the servers have long since been shut down. The world is also scattered with a variety of minor side missions. Some are point-to-point time trials, others have more complex parameters, but for the most part the huge majority of the game is spent trying to get from one place to another as quickly and as smoothly as possible, which is one of the most satisfying parts of the game. Ironically though, I think this also creates something of a problem. It comes back to what I mentioned about thinking flow states as being overvalued. Catalyst consists mostly of gameplay that is very effective at putting you into one of these flow states, which seems good, but has its drawbacks. The problem with being in a flow state is that as enjoyable as they are, upon exiting one, you tend to have forgotten the specifics of what went on during it. You remember you played the game, you remember you had a good time, but you don't remember in great detail what actually happened. Moments of friction, when you aren't just immersed in the game but having to actively engage with it, tend to be more memorable beyond a vague emotional memory. This leads to the unfortunate situation that as fun as Catalyst is to play, as good as dashing and clambering around its rooftops feels, you spend so much of your time in a flow state that the game becomes somewhat forgettable. Catalyst is far longer than the original, but doesn't really feel significantly longer, since so much of the game is spent dropping you into these immersive flow states that are enjoyable but difficult to remember in detail, which means that the first game spending a larger proportion of the game on weaker aspects of the gameplay, the combat and more limited indoor areas, lead to the game being more memorable as a whole. Broadly speaking, there are three tiers of missions: primary, secondary, and runs. Primary missions, of course, advance the plot and feature unique missions and set pieces. Runs are the least involved, most of them are point-to-point time trials, sometimes with side objectives like don't get spotted by Krugersek or don't break the delivery with hard falls. Many have a small amount of narrative content to them, sometimes it's a gift being delivered or some kind of medicine, and voiceovers from the client provide a little background. Secondary missions are a little more involved. They're all run for characters you meet in the primary missions, and usually give a little more backstory or time to get to know these characters. Some lead to unique zones only used for that mission, though others are just out and about in the open world. They're far simpler than the primary missions, but the chance to get better grasp on some supporting characters is nice. The primary plot is a little bland, so the character work often becomes the driving force behind an engagement. The basic plot revolves around discovering, uncovering, and ultimately stopping the launch of a joint corporate project known as Reflection. Reflection is a nanobot injection, advertised as being a way to permanently connect the user up to the grid, a combination of augmented reality and internet, without the need of other tech. Secretly, it also connects to the user's limbic system, allowing the conglomerate to remotely alter and manipulate the emotions of the user as a subtle form of mind control. It also lets them just kill you at the press of a button, as if that wasn't evil enough already. It doesn't explore the possibilities of this concept as much as I'd like. It's arguably a more complex issue than it initially seems, and I am aware of a different game that features a similar concept with vastly more in-depth examination of the ramifications, though I won't name it here so as not to spoil it. There's an attempt to add some complexity here through the fact that it started out as a healthcare system. The nanites can be used to fix certain health problems remotely and manage chronic conditions. In fact, it's based on tech first developed by Faith's mother, and primary antagonist Gabriel Kruger is currently using it to manage the chronic lung condition of his adopted daughter, who happens to be Faith's long-lost sister. It turns out that after killing Faith's parents and losing his own son in the November riots, Kruger found the unconscious Caitlin Connors and adopted her for himself, raising her as his protégée, Isabel Kruger. Kruger is a frustrating villain because he is equal parts mustache-twirlingly evil and genuinely believing what he's doing is in the best interest of everyone. Either going all in on the former or trying for a more complex version of the latter could have worked, but the mixture never quite does. Isabel is equally messy, but at least she tends to be a little more fun. The conflict between her rediscovery of her sister and her loyalty to a genuinely loving adopted father is palpable and well established, but at the same time she is a cool ninja assassin and amazing fighter who happens to have such bad asthma it needs an entirely new nanobot-based treatment to manage. It's kind of silly, but she is cool, so I'll give it a pass. A problem with a lot of the characters is that at least some of their complexity comes from the completely optional documents and recordings collected around the world. Like the world itself, various characters have motivations and backstories that are only revealed through these extras, but are flattened if you experience the game without them. Faith herself is the most well-rounded character, which is fitting given she's the protagonist. She's headstrong almost to the point of arrogance, but vulnerable at the same time. It comes across as a little overbearing at times, but in a way of someone trying to act more confident than they really are, and her vulnerability when this confidence breaks down, when she fails the people she cares about, is believable and at times moving. She's a likeable character, and it's understandable why so many characters default to liking her, even when her rash actions cause them trouble. It's a pretty diverse cast too, with a range of backgrounds and identities, and most of them are believable or likeable enough even when they get limited development. Even the more cliched characters such as Icarus, a fellow runner and rival to Faith, whose relationship starts antagonistic and becomes more respecting as the game progresses, or Plastic, a tech whiz Faith meets early on and quickly befriends. Plastic is some description of neurodivergent. It's never clear what, and tends towards that kind of screenwriter's version of neurodivergent traits, the kind that is equally likely to be relatable or irritating to neurodivergent folks. But she comes across as a genuinely friendly and supportive presence nonetheless, and makes for a nice addition. Often the most interesting characters, though, are those who are broadly aligned with Faith's fight, but still set in opposition to her in some way, like Rebecca Thane, the leader of Black November. Rebecca was one of the 4 leaders of the movement that led to the November riots, alongside Faith's parents and Noah, the man who took Faith in after their death and trained her as a runner. Even then, Rebecca was the most militant of the 4, always pushing for more extreme forms of protest, while the other 3 urged for non-violence. After the Connors were killed and Noah retreated to a place of attempted neutrality, she put her more violent approach to resistance into practice. The Runners' implied neutrality was always a weird plot point in the original, but in Catalyst it's made clear that the corporations turned something of a blind eye to the Runners, since they also use them for communication and deliveries they don't want the other corporations to know about. Until the events of the game, that is, when Faith's uncovering of Reflection's true purpose pushes KrugerSec to clamp down on them. In fact, Noah is so keen to keep this neutral place, he considers returning the data to Kruger to keep the peace. Rebecca's propensity for violence rather than peaceful protest is portrayed as a negative, but it's worth noting that of the 4 founding members of the resistance against the conglomerate, she's only one of 2 who are alive at the start of the game, and she's the only one who survives till the game's conclusion. She's also broadly correct in her analysis of the current state of things. Her philosophies are mostly taken from real-world anti-capitalistic rhetoric, though they are only expanded upon during side content. Despite this, she is repeatedly vilified in the narrative for her use of violence, painted as dangerous, which, to be fair, she is, and untrustworthy. Again, this is a case where background held within optional documents adds complexity. There's an underlying desire for revenge due to someone she cares about having been killed recently by KrugerSec, even beyond her desire to overthrow the conglomerate and create a fairer society for the lower classes. The narrative paints her viewpoint as correct, but tries to condemn her tactics, though the fact she does seem to be the most effective counter to the conglomerate does undermine this read somewhat, especially given that how dangerous and reckless she is often comes across more as being told rather than being shown. I really like Dogan as a character. He's the head of a local criminal syndicate, possibly the criminal syndicate, operating within Glass. Everyone talks about how dangerous he is, how important it is to avoid him if possible, and absolutely not to cross him. When you encounter him, he has a calm, fastidious demeanour, while nonetheless feeling like he could snap at any moment. Faith owes him a lot of money due to the events of Exordium. In fact, paying back her debt is one of the driving motives behind the early plot. She only steals the plans for Reflection because when the opportunity presented itself, she thought it may be valuable enough to clear her debt. Despite being in debt though, it never really feels like a true threat. His syndicate works with everyone, corporations, Black November and Runners alike, and while he's clearly a powerful and dangerous man, he isn't needlessly cruel. An early mission for Dogan sees Faith tasked with causing major damage to a tower under construction for one of the corporations that has reneged on a deal. He doesn't mention the tower is occupied at the time, but is neither concerned or surprised when Faith insists on pulling the fire alarm first to evacuate the workers. Dogan doesn't object at all. In fact, it feels like he was completely expecting her to do this in the first place. He seems to have a particular fondness for Faith. Despite his cold presentation, it's clear he values skilled people, and especially independent people. He quickly sees people's worth beyond a surface level. For example, upon talking to Plastic, he instantly sees her as a skilled hacker who would be valuable to be in contact with. Despite Faith defying him, perhaps even because of this, he seems more than willing to help her out and support her in his own way. He can be harsh, threatening, but it feels more like keeping up appearances and to push her in a way that she needs at times. There's a drawing Dogan has. It was made by Faith's mother and is implied that it may be a cryptographic representation of the algorithm that underpins Reflection. Why he has it is never expanded upon, but he's clearly familiar with Faith and her family even before Faith meets him in Exordium. Faith, of course, wants the drawing. It's part of the reason she's in debt to him in the first place, but when Faith is at her lowest, Dogan expresses disappointment in her giving up more than anger at her failure. He offers to wipe her debt, let her take the drawing and leave. Of course she doesn't. This disappointment is ultimately the push she needs to see her mission through to the end. He does give her the drawing once she stops Reflection, Dogan claiming it as being in his best interest that it doesn't activate, which is true, but he doesn't wipe her debt because it's clear he still values having access to her skill set more than anything else. But even before that, it's clear he's willing to use his influence to help her, even if he's not willing to admit it. When she was arrested before the game, she was originally going to be banished to the Greylands work camp. Dogen pulled some strings to give her a lighter sentence in the detention centre in Glass where she starts the game. His exact motivations are unclear, whether he has a soft spot for her, a prior connection to her mother, or even if he just wants to keep close a valuable asset. Possibly a combination of all of them. Either way, his willingness to tip the scales in Faith's favour, mixed with the ambiguousness of whether he's doing it for her or for himself, makes him a complex and multifaceted character. He adds a nice layer of depth to the supporting cast, and I'd have loved a chance to continue this continuity to learn more about him. Unfortunately, while the game leaves off in an interesting place, it's not likely to lead to a sequel. Reflection is stopped, but Kruger goes missing in the final confrontation, so Faith's sister takes over as head of Kruger Corporation. Noah is dead with his runners cabal scattered, but Faith, Icarus, Plastic, and the head researcher on Reflection before she was tossed aside seem to have started a new resistance group. Dogen is still something of a wild card, and Rebecca is more aggressive than ever. Along with the enhanced backstory to the world, it would have been a great jumping off point for future works. But Catalyst didn't receive as much positive coverage from critics as the original, and while it sold better than the original, it was still well below EA's targets, and since then, DICE has been on non-stop Battlefield duty. But both games are worth returning to, whether it's the tighter, more focused original, or its less focused but more expansive reboot. There aren't many games that allow for such smooth and engaging navigation through such gorgeous worlds. Thanks for watching.
Oh, whoa. Plastic! I need those doors open! Now!
I'm doing my best.
There's Kasek everywhere!
I said I'm doing my best.